thank you. I'm going to start by reaffirming the motion. Of course, we propose that this House would assassinate dictators. I'm going to cover three main points today. Speaker, firstly, the idea of global security and how it's a better global solution for this motion to be in place. Secondly, the idea that a global body, as my partner would suggest, would install democracy into undemocratic societies. And thirdly, the idea that should this be the last resort, it is the only logical and effective and logistic method to get the job done. But firstly, I'd like to start with some main rebuttals of the points brought forward by the previous speaker. Firstly, it's this idea that we need to set an example to people who commit heinous crimes. Surely, the fact that they're committing these crimes means that we've already done something wrong. They're already murdering thousands of people. So the system we have in place hasn't worked. People have already died. So try telling millions and millions of oppressed people globally who suffer under dictators that, we're going to set a good example. They're the ones that are dying. It just doesn't make sense. And secondly, this idea of using Britain as a case study to assess global dictatorships, because in Britain we are definitely, it just doesn't make sense, Mr. Speaker, because in Britain we're not under a dictatorship, so we can't simply allow ourselves to be judged by that same standard. And finally, my main point of report, Mr. Speaker, is this idea that we should send them to the International Criminal Court and we should have a fair and equal trial. Now, dictators, by their very nature, are dictatorial, so they don't quite go by the same rules that all of us do. So how can you possibly send a dictator to trial without issuing full-scale war? It just doesn't make sense. They obviously don't play by the same rules, and that's something that I'll interpret and talk further about when going over my points. So, on to my main points, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, this idea of global security. Now, we all know in current times there's a certain level of tension around certain Middle Eastern dictators because the Western world, shall we say, are afraid of them acquiring nuclear weapons. Now, this is because leaders of these certain countries aren't motivated by logic, they're motivated by other reasons, certain cultural and religious and social biases. Now, what this means is that an assassination of a dictator is not only relevant to the population of that home state, it's relevant to planet Earth. It is important. If a dictator is dangerous, holds nuclear weapons, then his security means that we have a lack of security. So that becomes a global problem. For example, to look historically, wouldn't it have been better for the world if certain dictators had been assassinated before they committed the crimes they did? And I'll go on to talk a little bit more about that later. Secondly, this idea that, as my partner mentioned in the definition, that a global body following assassination would then install whatever is needed to make it democratic. Now, I'll take the point.
You mentioned that dictators were biased by the culture from which they emerged. Does that mean that they do reflect the will of the people because they're enacting policies based on the culture from which they come?
What I said was that dictators can be biased both by cultural, religious, social influences. What this means is that they don't act logically, and even if they are acting on the will of the people, my point is it's a matter of global security. If the will of the people wants a dictator to nuclear bomb a country in the West, then of course that shouldn't be allowed, whether it's a cultural will or not, whether it's an individual or a social problem. On to my second point again, is this idea that a global body can install democracy into undemocratic societies. Now, what this will do is it means it offers support to improve the living standards of the people in their societies, men and women. Now, this in turn would effectively create a more globally, politically friendly climate. So what this means is that not only are we helping the people of the state under the dictator, we're also helping, the people of planet Earth who are living in a time where compromise takes precedence over violence, over action, over war, over danger. And just to finish on my final point, Mr. Speaker, again, it was brought up by my partner that assassination would be the final straw after trying to logically approach dictators. Now, what I'll argue is that this is the only effective final method. Now, history shows that dictators, quite simply, don't play by the rules, as I mentioned. Now, you can't approach an illogical problem with a logical solution. It doesn't make sense. Now, what I'm trying to say is that violent, dangerous dictators whose actions not only negatively affect the lives of their countrymen and women, but negatively affect the lives of people around the globe, can only be dealt with in one way, should they not compromise throughout the first processes. That most logistic way is assassination, and for that reason, I beg you to propose.